Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about what I believe, this is my opinion. I want to talk about what I believe is one of the big stumbling blocks that psychology has. Okay, one of the very naive positions that psychology has, that just because narcissists and psychopaths, because they appear so dead emotionally, okay, this appearance of emotional deadness, this appearance of emotional insensitivity, that just because it appears to be a lack of emotions, okay, then just because it appears that way, all right, to assume that what that means is that on the inside, psychopaths and narcissists, they actually lack emotion, that there's like a deficit of emotion. I think that's completely wrong. All right, I think it's my opinion. I think that's completely wrong. All right, and I think that this is the naivete. This is naivete, okay, of just because something appears a certain way, to assume that deep down inside it actually means there's a lack of emotion. Okay, and then even worse, this naive concept, I think it drives us to misinterpret, I think, even the CAT scans. They do like CAT scans of like people with psychopathy or like narcissism, where they show like dead areas, like areas that don't have a lot of activity, and then we just assume, oh, that just reinforces the idea that, oh, that just means, that just proves our point that there's not a lot going on in certain parts of the brain. But what we're forgetting is that maybe one reason why certain parts of the brain have low activity is because maybe other parts of the brain have very high activity, maybe too much activity. You see what I mean? So I think that we need to be very careful. All right. Now, I'll be the first to admit, okay, somebody with narcissism, somebody with psychopathy, probably does lack, you might say, the hallmark card emotions, the teddy bear emotions, the Lifetime channel, whatever, the Disney emotions, let's say. Okay, that's fair, but that doesn't mean they're not flooded with emotion. All right. So I think that we need to be very, very careful, that maybe the approach to people who have, like, say, psychopathy issues or who have narcissism issue is not to try to get them to feel more and try to open them up to more feeling. It may be to try to cool down where they may have an excess of emotion, emotional activity, emotional stimulation. Now, before we can even approach this, we have to be open-minded, all right, open-minded, to understand that emotions are not just the standard Hallmark card, Disney Channel, teddy bear, infantile emotions like sadness and grief and suffering and vulnerability and fear. There's also more primal emotions, okay, and they're just as valid, because all of us experience these things too. Things like sexual arousal, attraction, primal stimulation, like not just fear, but like terror, or like attacking, like where you're into the primal attack, the impulse for destruction. All right. We have to be very open and understand that we have all kinds of primal stimulations. All right. Primal stimulations that are extremely powerful, like, say, like the adrenaline rush, of having like a lot of things to do, being real busy, being under a lot of stress. That's full of emotion. In fact, that's probably a more emotionally exhausting and probably more emotionally flooding of our psychology than, like, say, a Hallmark card emotion of, like, say, nostalgic sadness or whatever. So we have to really appreciate that, what may be happening and what may be creating the barrier for narcissistic and psychopathic people, that complete barrier where they're just like insensitive, is they're probably just full of just this excessive amount of basic primal gratification stuff. You know what I mean? Or just being sort of in the modality of being very sensitive to their status in terms of primal gratification. So they're so caught up in that basic kind of, I would say, feral, primal, basic gratification stimulation. All right, and or even being preoccupied with it. Sometimes you're actually not being gratified, but that's a preoccupation with gratification when you're worried about not being gratified. So, like, gratification status, basically. But that basic primal gratification status and that whole area of just basic primal stimulations. All right. Things like sexual arousal, tremendous fear, being in danger, adrenaline, all that stuff. That's also, that can flood the mind so much that it may effectively shut down other parts of the mind, because you're so consumed with this more basic kind of primal emotionality. But it is emotional, right? It is emotion. It's just a more basic emotion, more primal emotion, more primitive, I guess you might say. But we just need to understand and be open that what's really happening with somebody who has this kind of like narcissistic or psychopathic kind of lack of, like, say, the more interpersonal, affective emotions. All right. What's really low is the interpersonal affect, okay, and a different level of emotionality. All right. But the reason for that is not because they're lacking emotion. God, listen to those dogs out there. Talk about primal stimulation. I am so sorry. They're not my dogs, okay? I don't have time to make a lot of takes of these videos, so this is terrible. Anyway, so let the dogs be like a setting to appreciate the mind of a psychopath or the mind of a narcissist. That's it right there. Those dogs out there, basically, it's the excessive amount of fireworks, excessive amount of just explosive, dramatic. Think of like an action movie. You know, that primal, that sort of primal sort of adrenaline excess. Okay, sexual attraction, fear of death, the spirit of attacking and destroying, fighting, like, say, even the thrill of like trying to steal from a store or like commit a robbery, or just all these things, or even just the thrill and the excitement of trying to commit a white collar crime, like commit a fraud or whatever, just basic everyday things, just lying to people, just being in a hurry, just being preoccupied with, just basic primal gratification, right? Or, like, say, in the case of a narcissist, being constantly concerned with how attractive they are, being constantly concerned with their status, the excitement of having high status and the gratification. With those dogs in the background, we're sort of pumping the soundtrack, right? It's sort of like, this is the atmosphere, charge, highly charged, primal environment, right? And so that excessive charge of being excessively involved and engrossed in this kind of basic primal gratification orbit, that basic orbit, that's going to flood out your brain and going to prevent other emotional states. All right. But if we want to attack this problem, we should not attack it as being a lack of emotion. Okay. We need to attack it as being flooded with an excess of primal emotions. Right. And I think that's a better angle for psychology. And also, those of us who want to improve ourselves, those of us who have behavioral issues, or those of us who suspect that we might have psychopathic issues or narcissistic issues, to stop looking at it from the paradigm that we're lacking things and that we're empty, and to look at it more that we're over flooded and we're over full with a lot of primal gratification activity, right? And so that the pathway, let's say, towards developing ourselves out of these conditions, or at least trying to, or even just improving just even a little bit, right? Because even if we could just be a little bit subclinical, that's better than being full blown clinical, right? So as we approach the idea of sort of moving away or evolving away out of these problems, instead of looking at it as trying to have more emotion and thinking of ourselves as being dead, we may want to reconsider that we're maybe hyperactive on the inside and we don't even realize it, right? We may be hyper aroused and not realize it because it may not feel to us. We're so adapted to it. We may not feel ourselves to be hyper aroused. What we may just feel is we just hate boredom. We hate when things are just, when nothing's happening. We get irritable when we're not like in action and have a lot of things going on. But maybe the golden path might be, instead of trying to seek more emotion and more emotional content in our lives, maybe the direction we want to go to sort of begin the path towards recovery might be, and it's perfect to have these dogs, right? Because that's like the soundtrack of what it's like to be in the cluster B, right? It's just too much activity, too much fireworks, right? But instead of trying to, like, say, have more emotion and have like more, try to find more emotional activity in ourselves, maybe the actual path might be to seek a sort of emptiness and a sort of lack of activity, sort of like to chill down all the primal gratification and primal stimulation, and maybe just learn to take that terrible thing that nobody with narcissism or psychopathy wants to do, which is to be completely flatline boring. That is like death, right? So you have to like face what seems like a death, right? You have to face that. Look, they stopped barking. Perfect. Anyway, so you have to like face what seems like going to be a death, right? Seems like it would be death. It would be unbearable to just live boring, 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 but just go to flatline, to try to find a relative flatline and just try to like experiment with maybe months and months of just not having any fireworks, not having any popcorn, not having any, big, primal anything, fears of death or whatever. Just put yourself in that mindset where you just want to try to achieve, sort of for the experimentation purposes, a kind of emptiness plan of just being boring as crap and just having every day, maybe even change jobs and maybe find a super boring job, just for the experimental purpose, right? And just lifestyle, maybe for a period, just not having any boyfriend or girlfriend, and just every day, just eating boring food, just chopping the vegetables and just simple food, not a lot of flavor, whatever. Just maybe not having any sexual activity, but not struggling about it, just not thinking about it, right? Just go empty, just to reset the baseline, all right, and to kind of get all that fireworks out of the primal zone, all right. So the primal zone can now just kind of be almost forgotten, to where we're just kind of in an empty, just boringness, right? And that's not the destination. I'm just saying that might be a phase to get transition, so that we can have a new baseline to establish a different transition point, where we can sort of discover a whole new state in terms of our metabolic, endocrine, and who knows what happens with all the hormones. Like when you're in so much primal gratification, we may hormonally be in a terrible place where we just have too much cocktail. The hormonal, let's say that hormonal platform may just be very counterproductive. You know what I mean? So we may just want to use that sort of boring life, as like a transition, so that we can maybe reset even our hormones, because our hormones may just be out of whack. When you're too much in the primal gratification and just too much in primal stimulation, right? So it may just be like, you could think of it as like, oh, but that's not what I want to do, and oh, that sounds like death. But think of it as like a drug addict. I'm coming off of like heroin, cocaine, whatever. Yeah, it seems like death, just to be boring, not to have any stimulation, whatever. But you just accept that, right? You just accept that because it's a transition, so that you can learn to have more room for other things. Okay. And that may be the gateway, not to be like a perfect hallmark emotion, like where now you're going to just be like a teddy bear or whatever, but at least to have like a transition, to have other ways of being. All right. And we may never, just by temperament, we may never become super emotional. That may be true, but at least we can sort of come down off that heavy hyperactivity on the primal stimulation level, right? And at least open the door to, like, say, just other ways and other places of being, so we can sort of get out of that inflation. Because in the end, psychopaths, they love to think of themselves as being empty, and they love to think of themselves as having no feeling or whatever. But deep down inside, they're probably hyperactive in the primal stimulation, right? And so if you can learn to bring that down and have that true emptiness, which is the real emptiness, there may be more room to sort of move about the world and not be burdened by all that primal excess, right? And I think that even in the case of somebody who is psychopathic, okay, maybe not in all cases, because maybe in some people being psychopathic is so ingrained in their genetics that even with all the tricks, there maybe still be some residual excess in that primal area. So I can't guarantee. It's just opinions. I mean, I don't know anything, but I'm just saying it may be worth it just for experimentation purposes, to see if through, like, say, very boring living, like really boring, super boring, like almost take it on as like a withdrawal from heroin, a withdrawal from, it's like withdrawing from methamphetamine, whatever. It seems like you're going to die, but you just accept it as an experiment, right? And you go into this like very boring zone, where you really deflate yourself and you go into this kind of emptiness, and you may find that there's room then when you quiet down all that noise from the primal part of the mind, right, there may be room to sort of get interactive with the world, and you may discover more room to have more slightly more normal feelings and maybe more normal human interactions with more conscience in the world. And of course, I can't guarantee that because I don't have any clinical knowledge, right? But it may just be that why not try it? In other words, we may, and just consider, we may be operating under the misconception that because narcissists and because psychopaths, they appear so empty of feeling, okay, we may just mistakenly assume that they're because they appear that way, that they're actually like missing a lot of feeling, when in reality what's really happening is the hyperactivity of a more primal kind of emotionality, right? A more primal kind of emotionality that sometimes you don't even personally feel. You're so used to it that you don't even feel it. All you know is that when you're encountering like the possibility of things being really boring, it just makes you feel like you're going to die, because like anything but being boring, right? So it produces that illusion that you feel like you have no feelings, but the telltale, the giveaway is that the last thing you want is to be boring, right? The last thing you want is to be empty, right? Not to have something to do, not to have some activity, all right? So that's the telltale. That's the telltale that what's really going on is you have a hyperactivity, okay? But it's just so ingrained that you don't feel it, right? So the idea would be to experiment with sort of like super boring routine emptiness, where you really get all the gratifications down to like really a very low baseline, very low baseline. Okay. And then from there, you sort of, from that emptiness, you think of it as like a transition. Okay. So that now that you have a new baseline, all right, now you can start interacting in the world. Okay. Where you're no longer so flooded with that primal stuff, that you now have room, I think, to have maybe more relatedness and more humanity in your dealings with people and situations on the outside. So the bottom line is, like, this doesn't come from knowledge. This is just opinion, right? But it's just worthy of experimentation. All right, that maybe we do have a misconception because narcissists and psychopaths, they appear a certain way. All right, we just mistakenly assume it means they're just lacking and lacking and lacking, when really what may be going on is a hyperactivity and an excess of primal emotionality, right? And so maybe we need to get wiser about primal emotionality and understand that a lot of people who seem to be missing a conscience, they seem to be missing a lot of feelings. What may be the cause of that is that they're excessive in primal emotionality. Okay, so what we're really dealing with in it is an excessiveness. All right. And so maybe the real answer is going towards sort of a deflation and an emptiness as a transition, okay, to be able to then have maybe more bandwidth and more space in the mind to actually interact meaningfully and not be so inflated with all the personal gratification and primal sort of stimulation activity, right? So anyway, just ideas. But I think in life, we can't just take it as gospel, everything that comes out of the tablets of Mount Sinai, everything that comes from the tablets of psychology. There may be some mistakes in psychology where we may be operating under some fundamental misconceptions. Okay. And so I think for a lot of people struggling with narcissism, even borderline psychopathy issues, um, the real issue, the frontier for us, the challenge for us may be dealing with the excesses of emotion that we have and not the lacking. It's not so much that we're lacking, it may be that we're too much and there's too much excess emotion going on. And so it may be just as an experiment, it may not work for a lot of people, it may not work for anybody, but even just experimenting, we may just want to try out maybe getting into periods, transition periods, where we experiment with being super boring, just to get that baseline coming down and to change that endocrine, change that hormonal cocktail, right? So that we now are in a different baseline neurologically and metabolically. Our whole body, it's not just the mind, it's the whole body. So that maybe our cocktail of hormones and endocrine and neurological, it's all maybe in a different baseline, okay? So that we're relatively more empty and not so fireworks going on at that primal level, right? Which will give us room then to sort of navigate the world in a more empty state, so that we can actually be more involved in the actual world around us and not so consumed in the primal inflation of our own, existential stimulation. You know what I mean? So, hey, these ideas, this is not knowledge that I'm giving. I'm not giving knowledge. I'm just questioning basically the standard orthodoxy so that we can have more room to do different types of experimentation, right? I think experimentation is the key, because in the end, what we're going to do is through experimentation and trial and error, each person is going to find what works for them. So if what I'm offering here is just something that somebody may end up ruling out, okay, well, hey, it's just another place to explore. And the more we explore, I think the broader and richer our experience. So I just offer this as an opportunity for exploration and experimentation. But I just want to leave with the final summary here. Anybody who thinks that they're lacking a lot of feeling, okay, anybody who thinks that they're too empty, all right, that they don't have anything on the inside, that may be an illusion caused by some kind of excess on the primal level, the primal emotional level. And what we may really be having is an overflooding of emotionality on some primal level that we may not feel. You may not feel it, but it may be there. There may be some excessive hyperactivity, hyperarousal at the primal emotional level. So I think we ought to always be mindful that that could be a possibility. And that maybe for some people, a good transition method may be to go for like 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 months of being super boring, just to experiment with changing the baseline. Just an idea. And if it doesn't apply, no problem. But I'm just offering it as just an alternative view, and really to consider that when things look a certain way, when things look like people are very empty, when people look like they're lacking emotion, what may be the case in some cases, what may be really happening is that there's too much primal activity, too much primal arousal. Maybe, Anyway, just an idea, and I thank you for your patience. I really apologize for those dogs, but in a way, those dogs actually are the perfect background, because it really sets kind of like almost like a soundtrack of what it's really like to have too much primal stimulation, except that people that are really adapted to that primal stimulation, it's so ingrained in them that they don't even feel it. So it's like, to them it's nothing, but that is maybe what makes them seem so dead, and so kind of like what produces that barrier, which makes them seem so insensitive to the world of normal human emotions. So just an idea, and I really appreciate your patience. Thank you.